The ABC has obtained thousands of pages of top-secret and highly classified cabinet documents following an extraordinary breach of national security. They reveal the inner workings and deliberations of 5 separate governments, Labour and Coalition. The extraordinary revelations show an alarmingly casual approach to the security of such sensitive documents.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch and a whole new year of watching the media. And how is that for national security? 2 locked filing cabinets sold at a government auction in Canberra, and when the mystery buyer finally prized them open,
they found this incredible trove of documents, thousands of pages, hundreds of documents, all highly sensitive, highly classified cabinet documents.
Yes, the secrets of 5 governments delivered to the ABC. After lengthy negotiations to protect the source, and probably ABC funding, they are now back in ASIO's hands. But not before the ABC and the rest of the media reported on some of the contents.
The papers revealed Tony Abbott considered banning welfare for under-30s. John Howard looked at scrapping the right to remain silent for police arrests. They also revealed just how many other secret documents have gone missing, showing the Australian Federal Police lost nearly 400 national security papers in 5 years.
Amazing and embarrassing revelations, which we surely have a right to know about. But guess what? If proposed new laws designed to crack down on foreign espionage had already got through Parliament, we might never have known anything, either of the leak or the contents.
Certainly what we understand is that if those new laws or if that legislation was to pass, then we may not be sitting here reporting this story today, because certainly the person who found these documents would be at risk under those laws. As journalists, we are potentially also at risk.
Under these new draft laws, journalists could be jailed just for possessing documents that might harm Australia's national interests. Does that include embarrassing our leaders, one might ask, or revealing to allies how lax is our security? And publication would not be necessary for journalists to commit a crime. Nor is it only reporters who could be jailed. As Peter Grester told the ABC, whistleblowers and public servants would be just as much at risk.
If they communicate to a journalist in any way, if they simply send a piece of paper to a journalist with their concerns, even if nothing happens to it, both the civil servant and the journalist can find themselves in prison.
And as The Guardian reports, they could be there for a very long time.
Penalties for breaching the laws would range from 5 to 15 years imprisonment for standard offences, stretching to 20 years for aggravated offences.
So, it is no surprise that 14 media organisations, including Fairfax, the ABC and News Corp, have united in protest. 2 weeks ago, in a joint submission to the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security, they argued
the proposed legislation criminalises all steps of news reporting, from gathering and researching of information to publication communication, and applies criminal risk to journalists, other editorial staff and support staff.
The media groups also complained about the scope of the proposed crackdown, which is incredibly broad.
The bill applies to information of any kind, whether true or false, and whether in a material form or not, and includes A, an opinion, and B, a report of a conversation.
Yes, that's information of any kind, including opinions, perhaps even about the menu in the Border Force canteen. So why on earth does the government think it's a good idea to do this? According to Paul Murphy, head of the Journalists' Union,
it's the latest in a long series of legislation that's been introduced under the banner of national security that's drafted in such broad terms as to be a threat to free speech and fair public interest reporting.
And leading Australian journalists agree with him. 60 Minutes reporter Ross Coulthart told The Australian,
"We're at a state in journalism where the government is using the cloak of national security to attempt to hide their failings, and we are allowing it at our peril."
Now, this is certainly not the first government attack on media freedom. In 2014, the National Security Amendment Act introduced jail terms of up to 10 years for journalists who disclosed covert intelligence operations. Also in 2014, the Foreign Fighters Act provided for journalists to be jailed for up to 10 years for publishing news reports or ads that might help terrorists recruit. And in 2015, the Data Retention Act permitted police to access journalists' metadata that could reveal their confidential sources. In each case, the Attorney-General assured us these tough new laws were not intended to criminalise journalism, and that promise is being repeated for the new law.
The bill contains protections for journalists to ensure that the secrecy offences do not interfere with their ability to engage in fair and accurate reporting in the public interest, even if they have received information in breach of a secrecy offence.
But, as former Supreme Court Judge Anthony Wheely, now head of Transparency International, told The Australian,
the law is sufficiently wide to get you, and if they're not intending to get you, why not exempt you?
Why not indeed? Wheely went on to say that offering journalists a public interest defence is not the answer.
The bigger point is, why should a journalist have to go through a criminal trial? There should be an exemption for journalists acting in the public interest, not a defence.
Last week, ASIO warned that Australia is facing its greatest espionage threat since the Cold War, and tougher laws are needed. But Federal MP and former intelligence officer Andrew Wilkie says that cannot be an excuse for curtailing press freedom. And we agree.
It justifies the government tightening up our laws around foreign espionage and in looking at ways to genuinely crack down on the increasing amount of foreign espionage and influence in this country. But it should not be at the expense of whistleblowers and the media, because at the end of the day, we need whistleblowers in the media to undercover wrongdoing.
And even if there is a guarantee that journalists won't be jailed, they won't be able to do their job properly if the government is threatening to throw public servants and whistleblowers behind bars for trying to tell the public about politicians' lies, concealments and mistakes. But now, let's flick the switch to outrage and the front page of last Tuesday's Australian.
Fashion diplomacy sparks cover-up uproar. Exclusive.
Yes, an uproar, no less. So, why all the fuss? Well, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been telling the world about an exhibition it's been running in Malaysia, showcasing, quote, modest Australian fashion. Called Faith Fashion Fusion, it was created by Sydney's Powerhouse Museum and first shown in Australia in 2012. And it's billed as an exhibition that
showcases the work of an exciting new generation of Australian clothing brands, designing stylish clothing for Muslim women.
There are some 750 million Muslim women in the world, so it's a huge and growing market for Australia. Indeed, according to DFAT, it's worth around $300 billion, or
more than the combined size of the current clothing markets in the United Kingdom, Germany and India.
But the use of taxpayer funds to promote modest fashion has sent several News Corp columnists and Tony Abbott into a frenzy, with the former PM telling The Australian,
I'm just quite frankly flabbergasted that an official Australian government agency should be pandering to what is, to put it at its kindest, an incredibly old-fashioned view of modesty. Now, I think this shows a very unfortunate readiness to sell out mainstream Australian values.
And how exactly is it doing that? I thought mainstream Australian values included tolerance and diversity. And so did The Australian, back in 2007, when it ran video of lifesaver Mekalala Hadid, which is in the Faith Fashion Fusion exhibition, as a promotion for its paper. But, coming back to that uproar, who else was roaring to News Corp apart from Mr Abbott? Answer, no one. Except for an army of News Corp columnists, led by The Australian's Caroline Overington, also on the front page, asking,
why are we supporting the idea that dressing freely is immodest? It's our government in the service of misogyny. It's not forward, it is fashion backward.
And adding inside the paper under the headline,
DFAT's grotesque foray into modest wear. DFAT's post is illustrated with women covered head to toe, as if this is the ideal. It is not ideal.
So here is the question. Is DFAT really saying it's ideal? And is it telling Australian women to cover up? Answer, no and no. But Overington's column was soon being promoted by other News Corp columnists, like the Herald Sun's Rita Panahi and the Telegraph's Tim Blair, while the Telly's Caroline Marcus was also piling on with a column of her own and sharing her outrage on News Corp's Sky News with Peter Credlin, Tony Abbott's former Chief of Staff.
My question is, how can we, as a Western civil democracy, which believes purportedly in the equality of women and men, be promoting this modesty culture, which is all about the repression of women?
Well, we just want to sell them stuff, that's why. Just as we do with live sheep and live cattle, which we ship to Indonesia and the Middle East for halal slaughter. News Corp should also be aware we sell arms to Muslim countries, including to Saudi Arabia, whose bombing of Yemen separatists has helped kill at least 5,000 civilians and put 7 million people at risk of famine. Indeed, the Australian government last week announced a controversial $3.8 billion plan to spend taxpayers' money on becoming one of the world's top 10 arms exporters. Yet, as far as we can see, there was not one word of criticism from columnists Caroline Overington, Caroline Marcus, Tim Blair or Rita Panahi about that. Seems it's fine to help kill Muslims, but not to dress them fashionably. But now to other big news. Last week saw Australian kids head back to school, and for Channel 9 it marked a new milestone in blurring the line between news and ads.
This Back to School segment brought to you by Officeworks.
Throughout January, back-to-school ads from Officeworks were just about everywhere on Channel 9. But Officeworks was also sponsoring news bulletins.
9 News, brought to you by Officeworks, helping parents be back-to-school smart.
And getting its competition on the Today Show.
How would you like to win $5,000 to put towards sending your kids back to school with a spring in their step?
Well, lucky for us, Officeworks helps you to be back to school smart.
And it was also scoring an entire segment on Today Extra about back-to-school lists.
Normally at the end of the year, as soon as I've got that school list in, I submit it online. So I've submitted mine to Officeworks because it's nice and cheap, and I can forget about it until I can pick it up sort of in January sometime.
How's that for plugs? Not bad. But what really caught our attention was this segment on Nine's national news 2 weeks ago, which began with a traditional ad, led into a sponsor's message, and segued into a 9 News report about how Officeworks could save you money.
This year, though, there is a way to save time and money.
Yes, go to You Know Who. The 9 News story that followed was, of course, an ad as well, or paid content, as they like to call it. But with a 9 presenter introducing it, a 9 team filming it, in Officeworks, of course, a 9 reporter getting Officeworks staff to tell us how cheap it is, and Officeworks customers telling us how happy they are. Amazing, eh? News for sale. And 2 days later, 9 did it once more with different shoppers, all singing Officeworks praises again, for a total of 7 minutes paid endorsement. So, what's it worth to the advertiser? Media commentator Steve Allen says 9's endorsement is
very, very valuable. I think a really good commercial deal. Great for Officeworks. Pretty darn creative by 9.
Now, as far as we know, this has never been done before, or not in news bulletins. So, why is 9 compromising its independence? According to one ex-commercial TV news director who did not want to be named,
there has been pressure for years, but now it's worse than ever. The one sacrosanct place was news, but what we see now is the rise and power of the network programmers. It's been a political battle for years, and now they have won.
And it's already reaping financial rewards. According to Ubiquity, Officeworks spent close to $2 million on TV ads with 9 last month, or more than 3 times what it spent in January last year, while Officeworks spending with rival Network 7 was cut by half. Seems the strategy is working. But is there a cost? Another former TV news director, who also wanted to remain anonymous, told MediaWatch he was amazed that 9 was selling its credibility, while the first forecasts we will now see a race to the bottom, adding,
news brands won't know their credibility value until they lose it.
Channel 9, however, sees nothing at all wrong with what it's doing, and indeed nothing new, telling MediaWatch,
unlike the ABC, we are a commercial TV network and are quite open about the fact that we take money for advertising. Yes, the segments are sponsored, but this is quite clearly declared and is no different to an ad sting before a radio news bulletin or advertorial in a newspaper.
And one former TV news director who was prepared to be named agrees. Stuart Richmond told MediaWatch that
the reality is free-to-air revenues and audiences are falling, and news is expensive to produce. We may not like it, but it's an inevitable consequence of economic rationality in a medium facing challenges which threaten its relevance and even existence.
There's no doubt we'll see more of it now the dam has broken. Will it make TV news even less relevant? We'll see. And you can read more about tonight's stories on our Facebook page or our website, where you can get a transcript and download the programme. You can also catch up with us on iView and contact me or MediaWatch on Twitter. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday. But for now, until next week, that's it from us. Goodbye.